Because drag racing season is kicked off full bore across the country, my latest deep dive historical video is a bit delayed in production. I promise it's coming soon, but I didn't want to leave you with nothing to watch here on the YouTubes. So, let's take a look through Gearhead history. We're going to do that through 15 photos. Photos that will show us the odd, the weird, the blood-chilling, and the totally awesome. Some fast cars, some weird stuff, and some incredible moments captured on film. Let's go. Raise your hand if you knew an Oldsmobile-based engine won the Formula One championship twice. This is the Repco Brabham 620 V8, and for 1966 and 67, it was the baddest engine in Grand Prix racing. Based off of the 215 cubic inch Oldsmobile aluminum V8 block, it had fuel injection, overhead cams, and iron cylinder liners. The Olds was chosen over the Buick as it had 6 head bolts per cylinder as opposed to the Buick's 5. Most importantly than any of that, it had a brilliant engineer on its side. See, for 1966, the FIA changed the rules from a 1.5-liter formula to a 3-liter formula. Coming into that season, people assumed Ferrari would run off and hide from everybody with their mighty V12 doubling in displacement. Those people didn't include the brilliant Jack Brabham. Recognizing the inherent value in building the lightest possible engine, he went into this project with gusto. The end result was a 3-liter V8 that made 315 horsepower at just under 8,000 RPM. Now that number was short of the Ferrari's V12, but they had that part figured out as well. Sir Jack Brabham and Ron Tornak built an advanced and flyweight tube steel chassis, giving the car a total weight of 1,295 pounds. The boys worked the bugs out and then began to crush everybody. The little V8 felled the V12s at Reims, Brands Hatch, Zandvoort, and the Nürburgring. Sir Jack Brabham won his 3rd title and became the only guy to ever do it in a car he designed with an engine he designed as well. The following year, he'd finished second to his teammate Denny Hulme running the same little screaming Oldsmobile engine. It has been said that the guys got annoyed at people talking about the engine being an Olds because of how hard they had worked to modify it and make it their own, but that's totally understandable. It is such a cool story. Brabham is underappreciated for all that he accomplished and for his brilliance and how he did it. He's perhaps my favorite historical F1 figure, and a man who saw brilliance in a little Oldsmobile V8. This is the famed BRE Baja Datsun 240Z getting after it. Raced at the 1973 Baja 1000, this effort came after BRE had dominated SCCA C production in 1970 and 71. Peter Brock and his crew at BRE were looking for something interesting and kind of fun to do, and as it turned out, so wasn't Datsun. They provided a very early production 1973 model, and the crew at BRE went to work. They hopped up the inline 6 for an additional 100 horsepower over stock, stuffed 513 gears in the back, added a roll bar, additional reinforcements like a strut tower brace and skid plates, American Racing magnesium wheels were selected, and some Bridgestone Dueler all-terrain tires were added, and an off-road racer was born, kind of. Brock has reported that the initial on-road portion of the event was the car's performance highlight, but once they hit the dirt, rigs like Big Ole rapidly showed them the way home. The driver and co-driver didn't have a lot of room as their seats were mashed up against a custom-built 26-gallon fuel tank inside the cockpit. The car did finish the event, but wasn't too competitive. Small mechanical issues slowed them, the machine's long front overhang did them no favors at all, and ultimately, it seems that a Datsun 240Z is frankly just better on asphalt. Now that didn't take away the awesome though. BRE would shut down in 1973, ending a highly successful run. But what happened to this car? It exists, and it's in the same fine condition it was at the close of the race. Pretty cool that it's still around. The American Dream loved him some drag racing. Yes, that is Hall of Fame wrestling legend Dusty Rhodes with a nitro funny car that he backed along with car owner Tom Bazell and crew. Driven most frequently by 1974 NHRA funny car champion Cheryl Greer, the car ran from about 1981 through 1984 across the nation. Rhodes himself chose the design out of a few different options. He's wearing his NWA title belt on the side of the car. Rhodes was a game-changing wrestler. He had Muhammad Ali-like charisma and the ability to melt a microphone with great interviews, hype speeches, trash talk, and whatever else he dreamt up. Originally trying to be a professional athlete, his wrestling career actually began in Boston, Massachusetts. It went so well at first that he once ate a Thanksgiving dinner at a soup kitchen. The man literally scraped his way up the ranks with hard work and a fast-moving jaw. The funny car wasn't a world beater, but it was a good car. They won the 1982 Stroh's Beer Race at Darlington, South Carolina, proving that they were a competitive operation. Drag racing is a sport that lots of famous people hang around in. Dan Haggerty, better known as TV's Grizzly Adams, was partners in a Top Fuel dragster for many years, as a for instance. Rhodes has gone to the big ring in the sky, but for hardcore wrestling fans, his words and amazing microphone work continue to bring smiles today. Look up his famed Hard Times call-out of Ric Flair on YouTube for perhaps the best example of his awesomeness, and it's pretty cool that he loved Nitro like the rest of us. These are not the records you want to set. This national dragster photo made by Phil Burgess captures an incredible moment. Alcohol funny car racer and longtime Texas competitor Grady Bryant went on the ride of his life at the 1989 NHRA Spring Nationals at National Trail Raceway in Columbus, Ohio. The famously short track has provided some harrowing times over the years. In this instance, Bryant's braking parachute failed to deploy properly, and as he was chewing up real estate, he got hard on the brakes. This caused the car to start bouncing. As it bounded into the sand trap, the nose caught in and catapulted the car into the air. The body flew off, and as you can see, Bryant achieved incredible altitude and distance before landing with a thud. He walked away, but the car was mangled, basically folding in half when it came down on the nose. Now, the most wild wreck this track saw was Gary Phillips rocketing out of the end of the drag strip itself. He actually crossed a street and landed in the front yard of a farmer named Herb White. Believe it or not, the NHRA then later bought a chunk of Herb White's front yard and made it an extension of the sand trap in the 1980s. The track still operates today, has been significantly upgraded, but is still pretty short because Refugee Road still runs across its back. Lots of times in drag racing, weird does not mean good. In this case, weird means awesome. Behold the Rick Stickle and Ray Noltmeyer campaign Rod Shop de-altered Dodge Colt station wagon, which debuted in 1971. Look at the way the drivers folded up in there. Now, just when you think it can't get better, it gets way better. The engine used in this thing was truly magnificent. When the car showed up at the 1971 U.S. Nationals, it was powered by a D-stroke 340, which displaced 318 cubic inches. The engine was equipped with a set of extremely weird and very cool Gurney Westlake cylinder heads that were developed for use in Chrysler's really short-lived IndyCar racing program. Keith Black developed the combo for the company, and the engine made about 560 horsepower at nearly 9,000 RPM. Ray Noltmeyer's the guy folded up in the cockpit, and he would leave the line at 8,000 RPM, sidestepping the clutch ahead of the Hemi 4-speed. Shifted at 8,500 RPM, the little buzzsaw could turn 10,000 RPM in the lights. Weighing in at about 2,700 pounds, it ran 1040s at 130 miles per hour out the gate at Indy while the team was tuning its mechanical fuel injection. The engine breathed through 8 slide valve style throttle bodies, and this thing was a true freak. It was run through the 1973 and 74 season, and, well, it didn't win any national events. It was an awesome promotional vehicle for the Rod Shop team and mostly a match racer against the likes of Anglias, Willys, and other traditional gasser-style cars. The machine was run hard around the Midwest with a concentration in the Ohio area. The 557 rear gear meant that Ray was through all 4 gears a few hundred feet down the drag strip. Just an awesome, awesome piece of drag racing history. Even without a body, this monster car was too fat to fly. Meet Carl Fisher and his 1905 Premier race car, a car commissioned to take on the best machines in the world as part of the 1905 Vanderbilt Cup. Fisher was hell-bent on the idea of building an American car to win the race, which was dominated by European machines. Cutting Premier's chief designer George Widley a blank check and orders to build an unstoppable monster, Widley did just that. Effectively a bare chassis with 2 seats and an air-cooled 4-cylinder engine displacing 923 cubic inches, the car was capable of making 100 horsepower, which was astronomical for the time. One problem: the car showed up to the race 300 pounds heavy. See, back then there were max weights on stuff for good reason. Not for brakes and risk of death, but because monster engines that made huge power weighed a literal ton. The weight maximums were a way to even the competition. Angry, Fisher and crew busted out the tools. They drilled a couple hundred holes in the chassis and then swapped out the drive shaft and massive hypoid axle for chain drive, which they assumed was lighter. After all the work, they saved 80 pounds. Trying to argue his way in, officials just wouldn't have it. The car ran some smaller events around the Midwest, but never competed on the international stage. This beast has long lived in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum, and it's more insane in person than the photos can ever do it justice. Well, it's too bad this car didn't get its shot at the Vanderbilt Cup. It may have been better off. All those holes in the chassis and chain drive seem like a recipe for big-time disaster. You can almost hear this thing saying nom 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 as it works. This is the mighty Union Pacific 9000082 rotary snowplow at work, and man, this thing is beastly. 284,500 pounds of snow chomping, powder throwing, keep the tracks open no matter what awesomeness. The unit's 55 feet long, 17 feet high, and spins a rotary plow that has a 12-foot diameter blade. As you would imagine, power for this snowplow was significant. 2,500 horsepower made by a huge EMD turbo diesel engine. The torque number? Likely 2 to 3 times the horsepower, as it often is in large diesels. And this thing needed all of it. Consider the fact that these machines would often work in snow 15 to 20 feet deep. As you can see, forward motive power is provided by the pusher locomotives pushing the plow itself, making this thing a virtually unstoppable force against the worst Mother Nature could throw at it. Built in 1971, it's one of the most awesome examples of a breed of snow mover that dates back to the 1800s. Back then, a guy named Orange Joe of Ontario, Canada, took an 1869 design, updated it, and had a full-size prototype built that was completed in 1884. Before the rotary plows, the only real method for clearing tracks was with a massive wedge plow forced through the snow by locomotives. Joel's new steam-powered unit was a huge advancement at the time because you didn't need the barreling momentum of a locomotive to move forward, just constant pressure and spinning blades. For 100 years, these were used in all types of different trouble spots around the globe to get snow off the tracks. Virtually all of them are retired now, but a few do remain to battle through places like Donner Pass in California and other spots in the Rockies. Initially powered by steam and then huge diesels, they eat up a lot of resources and are expensive to maintain and operate. That said, they work. You can find video of these things throwing snow, and it's both majestic and awe-inspiring to think what type of power it takes to complete this work. How cool is that? The true definition of being ate up with motor. This is the Metronome, one of the wildest drag racing cars ever built in England. Built by Mark Stratton, funded by Steve Cryer, and driven by both Cryer and a guy named Ed Shaver, it is lunacy on wheels. A blown, alcohol-drinking 392 Chrysler Hemi made the power, and apparently by 1972, they'd started to see some nitro in this motor as well. This car would regularly run 150 plus on the quarter mile, with the driver having no hope of seeing anything in front of him. The body? Yeah, that's a Bond Bug. The Bug was a microcar that used a Reliant 70cc engine, weighed 850 pounds, and had 3 wheels. They made 2,271 of them. Now, believe it or not, builder Stratton went to the factory for a body in white. They did one better, though. Intrigued by the project, the guys at the Bond Bug factory took a normal 300-pound production body and replicated in a lightweight 35-pound form. The car competed in a class called A-Class Competition Altered, and the only gauge in the cockpit was an oil pressure gauge because apparently that's all there was room for. Where is it now? I don't know that, but I do know it was never crashed. It would arrive with a whoosh. In the 1960s, America was obsessed with turbine engines. They were tried in everything from big trucks to the famed Chrysler turbine program, and yes, even used in fire trucks. Boeing teamed up with American LaFrance to construct a pair of turbine units. One of them was used by the city of Seattle. Carrying the name the Turbo Chief, the truck weighed 15 tons and carried a 100-foot ladder to calls around the city. Now, believe it or not, the Boeing 502-10 MA turbine made this rig into a hot rod, giving the truck the ability to accelerate to 50 miles an hour in just over 30 seconds, which was dragster-like stuff compared to the gas and diesel engines and fire trucks of the era. The turbine made 324 horsepower and likely weighed less than the cylinder head off of the equivalent diesel that powered this truck originally. The city paid $52,000 for the truck, which went into service in 1961, and by all accounts was used frequently, but there was a problem. Brakes. The air compressor was not run off of the turbine engine, but rather a PTO shaft that came off the transmission. This was a big problem as the truck was on typically short runs in the city, air pressure would be subpar, and in a hilly place like Seattle, that is not a good way to live your life as a fire truck driver. After working on the problem and attempting several different methods to fix it, nothing seemed to help. In terms of the purchase agreement, the city specified that if they didn't like the turbine, they could have a traditional drivetrain installed after the first year for free. And they did. A Hall-Scott gas engine and Fuller transmission were installed, and in 1977, that combo was swapped for a Detroit diesel and Allison automatic. The truck worked until 1991, making it likely the best $52,000 Seattle has ever spent on anything. And that's the twisted tale of the whooshing ladder truck that sped through the city streets of Seattle more than 60 years ago. Yes, that is a real car in Santa's lap. Welcome to the parking lot of Porter Chevrolet in Texas circa December 1953. The shiny new 1954 Chevrolet in Santa's lap, perfectly to scale, had a shipping weight of about 3,500 pounds, which lets you know he's big. Mr. Claus was built by Jack Bridges. He was the same guy who created the iconic Big Tex at the Texas State Fair in the 1950s. This was a next-level hard job to complete because of Santa's seated position. Even on his keister, the big guy was over 50 feet tall. Where he's standing, this jolly old elf will be more than 80 feet tall. So how did they make it? The whole thing was made of steel tubing and paper mache. A fleet of trucks hauled the sections of Santa to the dealership, and in early December they were assembled and craned into place. Now here comes the plot twist. A guy named Roy Davis, who was 46 years old and working for the crane company, wanted to get a really specific photo. So despite the fact that he'd just been released from the hospital with heart problems, he convinced the crane operator to hoist him up to eye level with Santa. Witnesses say that when he was being lowered, his body seemed to relax and he simply let go of the crane cable, falling 4 stories to his death right between those giant black boots. The death of Mr. David was reported locally and then never really mentioned again. The Santa got national attention and drew thousands and thousands of people to the dealership to take it in during the winter of 1953 into 1954. This truly is one of the more incredible things any car dealer has done to get folks to swing by, and I really just can't stop staring at this photo. Instant calamity. The 1992 season would prove to be one of the most incredible in NHRA funny car history. John Force was well into his Atlas rocket trajectory toward greatness and was poised to mangle all comers again in 1992. But there was this young kid named Cruz Pedregon. A rookie in funny cars with about half a season of Top Fuel experience under his belt, he was shaping up to be just another victim, and frankly, at the start of the season, he looked like it. The first 2 races, this happened. The car would hydraulic the engine, exploding violently the second he stepped on the gas at the starting line. The body blown off, the oil pan blown open. This was not a threatening car, until it was. Overcoming internal crew chief turmoil, his own rookie nervousness, and odds stacked against him higher than a redwood tree, Pedregon and his team got back into the game and went on a late-season run. They won 5 straight races while John Force burned, wrecked, and destroyed everything in his trailer. From explosively failing beginnings to being the only funny car champion of the 90s not named John Force, it's a story for the ages. Dan Gurney went Jaguar hunting with a Chevrolet Impala in 1961. It seems a harebrained scheme to ship a monstrous 1961 Impala SS over to England to throw down with a gaggle of Jags for the British Saloon Car Championship, but as it turns out, the Big Imp with its 409 and 4-speed could get down around the corners. When shipped to England, the car was basically 100% stock. It had been factory spec'd with the police and taxi heavy-duty suspension, and when it was raced, it still actually had an AM radio in it. Modifications were minimal. A Corvette rear sway bar was modified and added, brake cooling ducts made from heater hose were attached, and larger Goodyear tires were added. The engine was yanked and blueprinted and then reinstalled with the carburetor still carrying the factory jetting. Tested in California before being shipped over, Gurney thought he had something for the British set. Turns out he did. At Silverstone, he set a lap record and was driving away from the field, consistently more than 1 second better around the course than Graham Hill in his 3.8-liter Jag. Hauling the mail 2 laps from the finish line, a rear wheel failed, and that took him out. From hero to DNF in no time. Get him at the next one, right? Wrong. The car was banned from competition after that first race. Gurney went to his grave believing that it was Jaguar's, and this is the guy's real name, Lofty England, who got the big Yank Tank ban, but he didn't hold it against him. No clear explanation was ever given for the car's ban, and he never raced it again, sold it to a guy in Australia, and it was there until 2017. Back in the States by 2018, it was restored to its Jaguar mangling glory. Big car, big talent, big waves made. A fun story from more than 60 years ago. Well, he was known as Carlsson on the roof. The late Erik Carlsson was one of the greatest rally drivers to ever live. A national hero in Sweden, the man bought a Saab 92 in 1955 and started off a career that proved horsepower was secondary to guts and determination in rally racing. The car had 25 horsepower coming from a screaming 764cc 2-cylinder engine. The dude was racing against Jags and other cars with, real engines. Understanding that driving flat out and conserving as much momentum was his friend, Carlsson developed the basic techniques that rally drivers still employ today. sliding the car sideways and running flat out through the woods, all because he knew losing speed would squash his little car's shot at winning. He didn't just look good, he won. First in 1957 at the Finnish 1000 Lakes Rally, and then in 1959 at the Swedish Rally, also in 1959 at the Liège-Sophia-Liège Rally, which took some 90 hours of flat-out driving to win. He got a real hot rod in 1960 with an 80-horsepower Saab 96 on a factory deal. Between 1960 and 63, he won the Acropolis Rally, Monte Carlo back-to-back in 1962 and 63, and back-to-back at the RAC Rally in England. They actually wrote kids' books about this guy in Sweden and called him Carlsson on the roof because of how many times his round Saab ended up in that particular orientation. He actually appeared in a James Bond novel, delivered a hot-rodded Saab to the secret agent himself. I love this photo for his expression, the flipped car, and the beer in his hand. A bear of a man and a driver, and now you know. Call the press. Alexander Graham Bell's waterborne hot rod is the fastest in the world. Yes, the guy who invented the telephone also created a, quote, boat. Now that boat claimed the water speed record of the world in 1919 by traveling 70.86 miles per hour across the water with his right-hand man Casey Baldwin at the controls. While Bell didn't invent the concept of a hydrofoil, he launched its possibilities into the stratosphere with this creation known as the HD-4. At rest, the entire craft would just float in the water, but when the two 400-horsepower Liberty engines were fired and run at full bore, the HD-4 would gain speed. The main body would rise out of the water, while the ladder-style waterfoils did their job of cutting through the H2O. Started before World War I and finished just after it, the U.S. Navy loaned the engines to the project for the possibility of buying it and having access to the knowledge gained. The big idea here was to create a system to allow heavy airplanes a better and quicker method to take off from bodies of water. The cigar-shaped body looks like a submarine, and the odd manta ray-looking wings are kind of stubby, but the whole works was a functional success. Now, no one actually cared about it, and that was the big problem. Designed and built by Bell at his boatyard in Nova Scotia, Canada, it was the last great invention or innovation in a lifetime of them for the man. Bell would be dead 3 years after the initial success of the HD-4. After achieving the record, and because no one was interested, the craft was beached on the shores of the Salt Lake at Rotorcross to sit for 40 years. The wooden hull was recovered by the Canadian government and preserved. A full replica has been built, which can be seen at the Alexander Graham Bell Museum, and a scale model that was constructed before the full-size one was built is on display at the National Museum of American History. And now you know, Alexander Graham Bell, not just telephones, also the inventor of what was the fastest watercraft in the world. No, this photo doesn't actually show what you think it does. The image was taken during practice at the 1968 Hoosier Hundred in Indiana. Lloyd Ruby is in the rear-engine Indy car and Art Pollard is in the sprint car. Before 1970, the USAC Championship Trail included dirt tracks, and this race, held every September, was the second richest one on the tour, only following the Indy 500. The Hoosier Hundred was run at the Indiana State Fairgrounds on a 1-mile dirt oval. Now, in this photo, it sure looks like Lloyd Ruby has it all going for him. Seems to be leading into the corner, just driving away from the sprint car. Unfortunately, that's wrong. The more fragile rear-engine car broke before it even got to the green flag and didn't actually start the race. Meanwhile, Pollard took the more robust Roadster to a 10th-place finish. The lineup of the drivers in this race was insane. Al Unser led for 12 laps before retiring with guys like Bobby Unser, Wally Dallenbach, Roger McCluskey, Billy Vukovich Jr., Gary Bettenhausen, George Snyder, and Mario Andretti. And the capper? They all chased A.J. Foyt to the finish. The average speed of the race was 93 miles per hour, and the lead only changed twice, which is amazing. Now, if you look at this photo, you have to realize that sometimes the past is just unwilling to yield to the future, no matter how it looks on film. A weird car, but in the best of ways. This is the Austin and Grassy Fuel Cuda, and one of the neatest drag cars ever. What you're actually looking at is a front-engine fuel dragster with a Barracuda body on it. You can see the injector inside the passenger compartment area, and then look all the way to the back to see the driver, likely Rich Rogers in this image. Grassy drove it occasionally, but Rogers was the primary shoe, and he was a good one. The car used a blown, nitro-burning 392 cubic inch Hemi for power. So is it a funny car? Now, back then, people didn't think so. In fact, it's widely reported that fans of the era didn't like this car at all. It would actually chuck beer cans at it on the return road across the Pacific Northwest. Playing into this, Rogers would playfully flip the crowd the bird when being hauled back to the pits. There really were no rules for match race cars like this in 1966 to 68. Don Garlits did a similar thing with a freakish roofless Dart and claimed he had the first 200-mile-per-hour funny car, which people dispute to this day. But back to this car. The dramatic lowness of this hot rod is arresting to me. I love everything about this monster. The car has been restored and can often be seen at nostalgia and cacklefest-style events. The late Walt Austin would go on to an incredible career in drag racing, highlighted by the years he spent kicking everybody's tail with his son Pat, an alcohol funny car, and eventually a successful Top Fuel entry. Dave Grassy was no slouch either. He won Top Gas at the 1969 Winter Nationals in his own car. So how quick did this car go? It's tough to tell, but the safe bet is low 8s and high 7s near 200 miles per hour, and it is just too cool. How you like these drivers, baby? Pretty sure this would be the most unsuccessful pickup line of all time, but you are looking at the tallest driving wheels ever installed on a locomotive. Those suckers are 9 feet tall. 8 locomotives on the Bristol and Exitor Railway with a 424T configuration were made like this in the 1850s. Why? Speed. Locomotives had no transmission, and their giant pistons and heavy valve train systems could only move so fast. So if you have a limited max RPM for your piston and connecting rod, how do you increase top speed? You do that by putting larger diameter driving wheels on it. These trains could go 82 miles per hour before the Civil War was fought in America. They did have drawbacks, like the fact that the massively tall wheels made getting heavy loads moving more difficult. The reality is that steam engines improved. They were able to make more RPM and more power, so the need for massive drive wheels went away to some degree. Most steam trains have big driving wheels, but 9 feet tall, that's in a league by itself. Now, this was not a failed idea. These locomotives worked until the middle 1870s, a multi-decade lifespan during an era of history where things change constantly. It looks weird. It is weird. But now you know why they existed and the job that they did. I hope you've enjoyed this wide-ranging look back into Gearhead history. I promise I'll be back with a historical deep dive soon. I'm finishing off my notes, finishing off my research, and I promise I'm spinning up a gem for you, and it's coming soon. I'm Brian Loans. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more Gearhead history, photos, and in-depth historical research.